And we are live. Inflation is accelerating. Remember when they called it transitory? That was fun. Well, now they have a bunch of different explanations, and worse than that, they have solutions. So we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be talking about a new report that analyzes how states fared during the pandemics, which policies worked, which ones didn't. We're going to be talking about all that and more on episode 341 of the In the Tank podcast. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me today, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
I'm doing great. Hello, everyone. You know, it's springtime. It's my favorite time of year. The sun shines a little warmer. The birds sing a little louder. And raccoons take up residence in the roof of the Heartland Institute. So it's my favorite time of year.
Yeah, along with being VP of the Institute, he's also on raccoon detail. So he's going to be, after the podcast, going to be crawling around the inside the roof.
Let's try to wrap this up quick. He's so I can get him while he's still up there.
Yeah. Chris Talgo also joining us, senior editor at the Heartland Institute. How are you today, good sir?
Doing good, and I am looking forward to the raccoon being caught and no more noises in the ceiling.
Fantastic. And coming from Indiana, raccoon-free, Sam Karnick, who is publications director. I got your title right? Fantastic. How are you today, good sir?
Doing fine, thanks. How are you?
Excellent, as always. So, like I said in the intro of this, we have a lot of things to talk about, a lot of things. But before I do get into any of that, I have to put this message out there for all of those people that are listening to the audio only. You're probably catching this on a Friday, a Good Friday, in fact. But if you want to join the show a day earlier, watch the show a day earlier, you can by tuning in on Thursdays at noon, where we live stream the show from Facebook, Twitter, Rumble, YouTube, pretty much anywhere. If you look hard enough, you will find us, and make sure to subscribe and all of that. You can join in the conversation. You could leave a comment. You could post a question in the live chat there. Maybe we'll throw it up on the screen. Maybe we'll respond to your question live during the show. Also, if you are watching this on YouTube, make sure to also subscribe to our other channel on YouTube, In the Tank Podcast. We made a channel specifically for this show after YouTube threatened our main channel because of things that we said on this podcast. So in an effort to not self-censor ourselves, we created a separate channel, In the Tank Podcast channel on YouTube. Join that, subscribe that to make sure you don't miss an episode and to support our free speech. Gentlemen, got a lot of things to talk about. First thing that I wanted to kind of tee off the episode with was this story about Philadelphia reinstating mask mandates. So this article that I have and everything that I talk about is going to be linked in the show notes if you want to read the articles in length. Is a USA Today article, starts off saying, less than a month after mask mandates were lifted across the country, the city of Philadelphia announced Monday that it would reinstate a mandate next week amid a 50% increase in reported COVID-19 cases in the past 10 days. So this is the result of the COVID-19 BA.2 Omicron subvariant, which is responsible for 86% of current COVID cases in the United States. This variant is supposedly more contagious than Omicron variant, which was more contagious than the Delta variant, which was more contagious than the Alpha strain of the virus, which was very contagious to begin with. And thankfully, this new version appears to be less severe in terms of symptoms than the Omicron variant, which was less severe in symptoms than the Delta variant, which was less severe in symptoms than the Alpha strain of COVID. In fact, this variant is being nicknamed the stealth variant because a lot of people who have it don't even know that they have it. So, Jim, a 50% uptick in this version of the virus that a lot of people won't even know that they have is resulting in, the mask mandates coming back. Seem like a bit of an overreaction. What do you think?
50% uptick in this variant and 1,000% uptick in my annoyance at all this BS. I mean, they're just never going to get the boot off our neck, are they? They're just never going to stop this stuff. You know, study after study shows that masks have little to no effect on the spread of COVID-19 this entire time, no matter what variant you have. States, countries, cities that relaxed mask mandates or didn't have them at all, and people just walking around as normal human beings, had no real increase in infection rates or hospitalization rates or anything. It's all about control, and it's like it's unrelenting, and it is just so damn depressing. I mean, I was taking notes. This is going to be a really fun podcast, by the way, everybody. I got to tell you, because I was taking notes this morning on what we're talking about. Inflation, the economy is absolutely in the crapper. You know, all of my notes.
Didn't we talk about that last?
Oh, that's in my notes. I was going to address that. But you know, this mask stuff. It's like I have to go. I'm taking a flight on in May, in about, I don't know, what is that now? 4 weeks. In about a month, I'll be getting on an airplane. I am dreading it, because the Biden administration extended. They were supposed to end the mask mandate on public transportation in the United States was supposed to end on Friday, Good Friday, tomorrow, as we're recording this. They extended it for another 2 weeks. And in 2 weeks, they'll extend it for another 2 weeks.
Right.
And then they'll extend it for another 2 weeks. I mean, it doesn't matter what the science says. You know, so-called party of science just keeps making us put face diapers on and not see each other, not see each other smile, not interact as humans. It's cruel. It really is cruel. And at this point, you just have to come to the conclusion that the cruelty is the point, that this is intended to break you and to make you more compliant to whatever their wishes are in any other endeavor. And, you know, we've been saying this for 2 years. You have to just not comply. You have to say, screw you, I'm not putting it on. When you go to the grocery store in Philadelphia, tell them to F off and keep your mask off. And then maybe if they kick you out of the grocery store, then just have it delivered. We have to stop participating in this bullshit, period.
Oh, dropping the S-bombs already. It's coming in hot.
It's fortunate I only had one swear word in that one, because I had about 7 on my mind as I was going through it.
And Jim's views are the views of Jim and not necessarily that of the show or the organization. I do want to warn everybody, though, about the seriousness of the symptoms you might experience if you catch yourself with COVID-19 BA.2 Omicron subvariant. The symptoms include headache, sore throat, body aches, severe fatigue. And I'm pretty sure that I catch the BA.2 Omicron subvariant after each week's podcast. So, you know, we've talked on this podcast that no matter what, there's people going to be wearing masks for the foreseeable future. We've also, we haven't really discussed, though, the likelihood of the return of different restrictions and mandates and measures to combat COVID. So I'll go to Chris next. What do you think is the likelihood of other COVID restrictions and measures coming back, whether it be mail-in voting, outdoor dining, further lockdowns? What do you think?
For months, I've been saying that I think that come the fall with the midterm elections, you know, happening, that COVID-19 is going to magically reappear, and we're going to go back into lockdown. We're going to go back into, you know, 2020 all over again, because I think that this is mostly politically motivated. I see that the polls are showing the Democratic Party is in for a total walloping come this November. So I would not be surprised whatsoever if they go back to, mandates, mail-in voting, and just, COVID-19 mass hysteria all over again. I think the Philadelphia situation is, very concerning, because like, you said and Jim said, the subvariant of Omicron, this BA.2 subvariant, is so much less lethal than every other strain to date, that
Right.
Nancy Pelosi had it and she was completely fine. She's 80 something years old. So it's like, at what point do we just say we have to learn to live with this? We have to just move forward. I am very worried that this is going to creep up come early fall, and as the election gets closer, and we're just going to be right back to where we started from.
Yeah, Sam, I want to bring you in on this topic, because on this podcast for, I don't know, seemingly 2 straight years, every week we had some COVID story to talk about. And I was more joyed than anybody here to not talk about it the last month, because it seemingly was out of the news cycle. But here we go again. Is this something that's just going to be reoccurring for how long? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
Very possibly. This has been political from the beginning. As Chris alluded to, there was a strong desire to control what kind of votes could be counted in the 2020 election. I don't think it's quite the same now. They're not prepared to do in 2022 what they did in 2020. So I think that the COVID restrictions are being based on strictly on polls at this point. They're not following the science if they ever were, but at least they had excuses early on. Now
Right.
they don't have any. It's the science basically says, well, this is endemic now, and it has followed the course of viruses, which is that it starts out more damaging to the body and not as contagious. Then it gets more contagious and less damaging,
Right.
and then it pretty much becomes something you live with and you don't really worry about. But you do worry about it if there's a political angle there that you can exploit. As the writer H.L. Mencken said, that the object of politics is to keep people frightened of hobgoblins
Yeah.
all the time. So the hobgoblins that we have right now are very damaging to the Democrats and the Biden administration. And we'll probably be talking about some of those hobgoblins today. So coming back to the COVID is it's a good thing for them politically, they think, but it really isn't, because nobody's even saying that the polls are not saying that Biden has done a good job of handling COVID either. So they lose whatever they say. Whatever they
Yeah.
say, they're going to lose.
Yeah, after Christmas, as constant listeners of the show know, I caught COVID. I think I got the Omicron variant, and after I got over it, I knew that I had the natural immunity to it, at least for a while, depending on what science you read. So I stopped caring completely about COVID, and then even going to stores and now and social gatherings and all of that, COVID is so far from my mind, and I think your average person thinks of that similarly. It's just like COVID kind of seems over. And now, though, in Philadelphia, at least, when you're walking by people with masks on, it's like, boom, a reminder that you need the government to protect you from this thing. And I think that's what that's kind of the point that you were making with that quote there. But
well, what
yes.
depresses me about this happening in Philadelphia is that we live here in the People's Republic of Illinois, and every bad idea possible in COVID has been exercised here in Illinois. And I'm just waiting,
Oh, it's coming.
It's coming. If it's going to happen in Philadelphia, it's going to happen in Chicago. It's going to happen in Cook County, all across. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense. There's no science behind it. Just let people get on with your lives. As Sam Karnick said, this is endemic. We knew it was endemic a year ago. Putting on a mask to stop the spread is impossible. And the thing about I keep complaining about this stuff, but the thing about wearing a mask on an airplane, it's stifling. It's annoying. It makes, to me at least, I'm sure it is to the vast majority of people, but an airplane actually is one of the cleanest air systems you can be in indoors. They filter that air. I think it cycles through every 15 minutes and it's all cleaned, and it's fresh air from outside that comes in. So it's like, you couldn't be safer than on an airplane as far as air filtration, yet you still have to wear a mask when you don't have to wear it anywhere else. And I mean, we live, what happened here with COVID, and not actually the disease itself, but what the government's reaction to the pandemic has done, it's made a certain percentage of our population permanently mentally broken. I mean, to this day, and like I said, springtime is my favorite time of year. The wind's blowing, it's warmer, it's nice outside. I still see people walking around outside alone with masks on. Right. If you're doing that, you are mentally broken. And I'm sorry, you need to get some therapy, because that's not necessary. You are actually, that's a psychosis at that point. There's no reason for you to have a mask on to protect yourself outside with a nice breeze going. I mean, remember the beginning of this stuff? They were tracking down people out on the ocean, paddleboarding, and arresting them because they were putting others in danger, apparently, by breathing, by existing in the world. It's sick. It's sick.
What if a dolphin?
The pandemic is not
COVID,
nearly
Jim?
as dangerous as the sickness in our society right now, based on the government reaction to the disease.
What if a dolphin caught COVID, Jim, because of that paddleboarder? Do you not care about dolphins? Jeez.
I think the Earth would be better if we had COVID-resistant dolphins out there, just so that we're all safe.
Good point. All right.
Stopping the spread of a very highly contagious disease is about as reasonable as thinking that you could control the temperature of the earth.
Oh, I thought you were going to use an inflation analogy to do a transition. Good enough. Good enough. We're going to transition into inflation now. That is our main topic of the show. So I've got a couple of pieces here. The first one I got is the New York Times, an article titled "Inflation's 40-Year High." The author of the article starts off saying, the overall cost of gas, food, and other everyday items is increasing at its fastest rate in more than 40 years, and experts cannot say with confidence whether price increases will speed up or slow down in the coming months. The accelerating price rate, in other words, inflation, hit 8.5% in March over the previous year, according to the federal report released yesterday. And that was the fastest increase since 1981, or to put it in another way, 8 years before I was born. Annual price changes in March include fuel oil up 70%, used cars up 35%, meats, poultry, fish, and eggs up 13%, electricity up 11%, dairy products up 7%. Chris, remember when they told us that this was all transitory and this is due to the government lifting, COVID restrictions? What's really happening here? You've been writing about this a lot, so I think you're a good person to explain this.
Yeah, so here we are 15 months into the Biden administration, and we've been told, 5 or 6 different stories about inflation. First, it was transitory. Then it was, the greedy corporations. We've had Putin's price hike. We've had the supply chain. We've had everything they could possibly throw at this. And you know what? Nothing's sticking. First and foremost, I think it's important to point out that the American people understand what's happening here. They are not buying this at all. Across the board, the polls show that the American people are blaming this on Biden's policies, which I, think anyone, that understands what's happening here would agree with. And this is also, Donnie, we discussed many, many, many times, the Federal Reserve and their, endless money printing binge.
Right.
Just go look at the M2 money supply chart over the past, few years. It has gone directly, skyward. Go look at the Fed balance sheet, same thing there. So, I wrote a couple articles about this. I think what, you've got happening here at the 50,000 foot level is, first of all, they are printing the federal government. And this has been happening, for the past few administrations. This is not strictly happening during the Biden administration, but Federal Reserve has just been flooding the economy with, cheap money. And on top of that, you have Biden's energy policies, which, for the past, 15 months now have just been taking a wrecking ball to the American energy industry. So you've got, American energy going, just going sky high. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got, all these dollars just flooding the system. So you've got the worst of both worlds. You've got it from the demand side and from the supply side. And, they keep saying, okay, it's going to get it's going to get better very soon. I watched a whole bunch of economists say, it's going to teeter out and it's going to, start declining in May. You know what? They've been saying that for months and they've been wrong every single time. There is no evidence, no data pointing that this is going to start to decline anytime soon. It just makes me wonder, what their long-term, strategy is here. The American people know what's happening. They know why it's happening. And obviously this is at the, the front of their minds. It like, like a very astute, political commentator, James Carville said in 1992, it's the economy stupid. In 2022, it's inflation stupid.
Yeah. It's, I was reading to you an article that was by Paul Krugman, and Paul Krugman's like, oh yeah, these prices are high, the inflation rate is high, but it should soften out over the next couple of months and all of that. And when people hear that, I think they're like, all right, prices will go down again. Like, thank goodness. But nobody is suggesting that. So we're at 8% inflation. Let's say it goes back down to 2%, right? Some miracle happens and it goes down to 2%. Those prices are going to remain 8% elevated.
Right.
They're not going down.
Well,
they're going to, at best, they're going to plateau.
One more quick point, and then obviously, Jim and Sam, I'm sure they've got a ton to say about this. The producer price index report, which is wholesale inflation, is 11.2%, all-time high, all-time highest ever recorded. That is, that is showing what's coming down the pike. Because if the businesses are having to pay, 11.2% higher for, commodities and such, they're going to pass that on to the consumer like they always do. So it's not. All signs are pointing that this is not, abating anytime soon. It's going to actually get worse.
Well, Sam, do you want to jump in on this? Because, I know that you at least curate a whole host of different budget and tax articles that go on our heartlanddailynews.com website. So what's your take when you saw this 8.5% annual number?
Well, obviously, it's an awful number. And the interesting thing about this to me is that as Chris said, the Biden administration doesn't seem to, they go back and forth. They say, well, it's this, then it's this, then it's this. And they don't seem to know really what is going on, what is causing the inflation. It's possible that they do know. They just don't want to admit it.
Sure.
The reality is that, yes, the Fed has been printing money like a drunken sailor. They actually, though, were raising interest rates in 2019 to the degree that we probably would have had a minor recession in 2020, even without COVID. With COVID, we had a quick depression and a quick return from the depression. So that was a rather extraordinary positive thing that happened, if you think about it, that we could get out of a depression so quickly. It hasn't been done since Warren G. Harding in the early 1920s, getting out of the post-World War I depression. So what's going on here, though, is that they at least pretend not to have any idea what's happening. But the biggest factor, although the Fed printing money is certainly complicit in this, as you mentioned, Donald, it didn't happen when Trump was president, and we didn't have this kind of inflation even in the Obama administration. Why is that? It's because the banks were not putting that money into the economy. They were simply keeping it as reserves. Now, when banks start lending out money, that's when you start to get the inflation. So what has happened, though, is that with this huge amount of money already in the economy, then you add a whole large amount of federal government spending, which we did last year. You add all that money, you put all that money into the economy. So you're sending much more money without worrying about bank reserves. You're sending much more money into the economy, chasing what? The same amount of goods. So you have the same amount of goods, more money. You're going to get inflation. But then on top of that, you have the international market for fuel, for oil, natural gas. So what you do is you shut down American sources and production of oil and natural gas. You're decreasing production. Then what happens is you're going to raise the price. Now you have these prices going up, and they're pushing throughout the economy. Yes, but the one way that you could turn this around very rapidly is to reduce the regulations on the oil and gas industry so that you get more production of it, and by reducing government spending. That's how Hoover did it.
Right.
Excuse me, not Hoover. That's how Harding did it,
Sure.
by reducing government spending, and he cut taxes.
Good luck
So
with
if you
that.
reduce government spending, you have less demand.
Yeah.
But Sam, don't you think that it's different, because from 2008 to 2020, the Federal Reserve was pumping money, but it was basically going into the stock market and real estate bubbles. 2020 was a very different situation into 2021, because they just started sending money directly to the people. That flowed instantly into the economy. So to me, it makes sense that this inflation would be a direct reflection of the $7 trillion that just flooded the economy, during 2020 and 2021. And the American Rescue Plan, might have been the icing on the cake on that, where they were just sending out, stimulus checks willy-nilly when people had already gotten thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. The government gave people a whole bunch of money and said, here you go, you can spend this. And people did what they do. They started spending that money.
Yeah, don't go to work. Don't go to work and earn money. Just here, take this, spend it.
But here's the interesting thing. They didn't get that money. People like us didn't get that money and invest it. They spent it.
Right.
And if you're investing, then you are increasing supply. What we have here is a supply suppression inflation, is that the supply of goods and services is being suppressed by the federal government. And then that's why all this money is now chasing fewer goods and services, and that's why everything costs more.
Okay.
But if you free up the expansion of supply, which is exactly what Donald Trump did when he first came into office in 2017, they not only lowered tax rates, they also reduced the regulation on industry, and in particular the oil and gas industry. You increase supply, you don't get the inflation.
Okay, remember that. Remember that point that you just made about the reduction in supply, because I'm going to get back to that. But Jim, what are your thoughts on this? Just kind of an overview.
I don't know why you guys keep saying the word inflation. It's not inflation. It's the Putin price hike. Don't you guys listen to Jen Psaki? I mean, she came out in her opening statement the other day. She said Putin price hike literally like 4 times in 2 minutes. And it's like they and of course, I mean, why wouldn't you go ahead and do shameless messaging like that when you have the entire media in your pocket and who will actually, parrot that for you? But actually, I still can't even figure out, is using the term Putin price hike, is that Russian disinformation, or is not using Putin price hike as a term Russian disinformation? I can't keep it straight. It's just amazing. But Hugh Hewitt, who's a radio host on Salem, the Salem Radio Network, he had a tweet I saw this morning. He said Biden wanted to be FDR and he ended up being Hoover. Look, the thing that makes this so depressing, it's bad enough. I mean, Donnie and you, Chris, I believe, are both too young to actually, when inflation's at a 40-year high, neither of you are actually old enough to have even experienced that as an infant. Myself and Sam actually do remember the early 1980s. We were alive. I was a child, but I was 10 years old, but I was still alive. And I remember the Carter years as well as a kid. But look, we've been knocked on our asses. I can say asses. We've been knocked on our asses for 2 years, right? With COVID and lockdowns and layoffs and kids not going to school and graduations are canceled. Weddings are canceled. You can't visit your sick or dying parents in the hospital. You can't hold grandma's hand as she passes into the great beyond. And so our lives have been stressed and reduced in a thousand different ways. And then we finally, despite what's happening in Philadelphia, we finally kind of get back on our feet and finally get a sense of normalcy, that is psychically necessary, to live. It's psychologically necessary. And then the skyrocketing inflation knocks us all on our asses again. And it's like you feel like, when is it ever going to let up? We are in a constant state of crisis. We just got past COVID, supposedly, hopefully. And now we have this runaway inflation that, actually half of the United States has never experienced, because half the United States is under the age of 40. Gasoline prices year over year are up 50% today than they were a year ago. Natural gas up 22%. Electricity costs up 12%. Grocery staples like, milk, butter, eggs, bread, those sorts of things up 14%. Year over year. Even baking supplies. I started during COVID, I started as a new hobby, baking bread, baking cakes. Those supplies are up now like 10 or 15% over where they were last year. So when they say inflation is up 8%, that is so lowballing it. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows when they go to the grocery store, they can't fill their cart, or if they do fill their cart the way they used to a year or 2 years ago, it costs twice as much almost. It's outrageous. It's crazy. And, these people in this administration, they actually don't even care about inflation, because they keep calling it the Putin price hike, despite the fact that inflation started going up almost immediately after Biden took office, because one of the first things he did was cancel the Keystone XL pipeline and follow through on his promises to shut down the oil and gas industry in the United States. And the energy, as they say, is the master resource and affects the costs, and the economy in every other way. But first, it was, it was transitory, as you guys said. It's like, this is transitory. And then, it's because of the supply chain. The supply chain, we're coming out of COVID, and the supply chain is making inflation happen. Don't worry. So when we'll get the supply chain fixed, which they're not even attempting to do, all this stuff will go away. But even their Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, here we are in the biggest inflation crisis in the lifetimes of most people that live on the world, on the planet. And Janet Yellen says, you know what we need to do? One of the most important things we need to do to fight inflation is to transform our economy even faster to net zero and green energy economy. It's insane. Give Jimmy Carter credit. At least he cared about the inflation and how it affected everybody's lives and their families and their pocketbooks. This administration does not care. And I've said this probably on this podcast 100 times. If they were trying to destroy this economy and destroy the United States, what exactly would they be doing differently than what they're doing right now? It is hard to imagine that they could do anything better to destroy this economy and this nation than the policies that they put in place for the last 2 years.
The Putin price hike thing might sound ridiculous to anybody listening that has like a moderate understanding of economics and the results of printing and pumping trillions of dollars into the economy. But most people don't know that. So I've started using this, this in my own personal life. Just blame Putin. The other day, I forgot to take out the garbage. This was clearly due to the stress that I was suffering due to all of the Putin war crimes that are going on.
Yeah.
I forgot to pick up milk on the way home from work yesterday. It was because I was distracted by all the Putin rhetoric that's coming out over the radio waves. So
it's like that hippie. It's like that hippie in Forrest Gump's like, it's the damn Johnson and his war. That's why he beats up Jenny, right? It's always something else.
That's right. Yeah.
But by the way, if it is the Putin price hike, why is inflation in Europe 2% lower than it is in the United States?
Don't use logic, Jim.
Oh, gosh.
Tony, just to piggyback off one thing that Jim just said. So, in the late 70s, early 80s, when inflation, was, terrible, at least they tried. At least President Ford had his Whip Inflation Now campaign. Granted, it didn't really work, but it at least showed you that they were in touch and they cared. Nowadays, you've got the chief of staff, Ron Klain, saying, inflation's a high-class problem. They just dismiss it. It's like don't bother us with these petty issues. Inflation is costing the average American household $5,200 a year. That's a lot of money. These people are so out of touch. They don't go to the gas station. They don't go to the grocery store. They don't care. And that's what I find, most maddening about all of this.
No, they're just going to double down on the solutions that got us into this predicament in the first place, and they'll just rain more cash on everybody. This will be another round of stimulus things and relief packages and all of that stuff to allow people to pay for $8 pound of beef and $6 gasoline.
Well, remember though that they're in charge, and so if they say, well, the economy's awful and so we want to send people money, that's not a good message.
Good point. Them. No, they've got even worse solutions, which I'm about to get into here.
But I will say this: the Putin price hike is simply another example of gaslighting. They just always do that.
Yeah, and as Jim says routinely on this podcast, gaslighting is the theme of 2022 so far. So I've got there's a piece here again in the show notes. This is hosted at StoppingSocialism.com. It's a Ben Shapiro piece titled, "Yes, It's Biden's Inflation." He starts off the article saying in 2020, well, no, I don't think he starts off the article saying this. It says it somewhere in the article. In 2020, the government spent approximately $6.6 trillion in federal outlays. In 2021, the year of the recovery, the government spent $7.2 trillion. The spending was wildly unjustifiable. With vaccines available and people going back to work, the Biden administration had a responsibility to leave the economy alone. Instead, Biden insisted on reshaping the economy according to his whim. So, I mean, we can get, if we wanted to spend a little bit more time on this angle, we could talk about, the kind of the reckless programs that were in place throughout COVID, even into the Trump years. We had plenty of negative things to say, or at least some of us did, about the way that these relief stimulus package things were distributed. In many cases, people got, $1,400 checks that didn't lose their job and weren't negatively impacted by COVID in any way. But, you would think that type of spending would abate as the pandemic abated, and it didn't. According to this, it grew from 6.6 trillion to 7.2 trillion. So it's like it's going in the complete wrong direction. And to think that that didn't have anything to do with the inflation that we're seeing, and that it's more attributable to Putin and supply chain issues is ridiculous. But as I mentioned kind of at the beginning of this topic, scarier than them trying to shift the blame away from themselves, which is the priority number one when it comes to politics, is their potential solutions or their proposed solutions. So the list, you could add this on top of the list. So we had transitory inflation, supply chain crisis, Putin's fault. Now, a fourth one we could add onto that list, pandemic profiteers.
Oh, God.
So this theory suggests that prices are going up because greedy businesses are trying to take advantage of the situation, stick it to the consumers, and line their own pockets with cash. Joe Biden said like a month ago that oil and gas companies shouldn't pad their profits at the expense of hardworking Americans. Elizabeth Warren blamed giant corporations who say, wow, a lot of talk about high prices and inflation. This is a chance to get in there and not only pass along costs, but to inflate prices beyond that and just engage in a little straightforward price gouging. So them and some more of their ilk are pushing for a windfall profits tax to really stick it to these pandemic profiteers. So I guess starting off, why don't we just define our terms? Sam, maybe you'd be best equipped for this. What is the windfall profits tax?
Well, windfall profits tax is actually a very complicated kind of assessment. It's done. It's a really very much an accounting thing, but the bottom line is that what they present is that some companies are making too much money because of stupid things the government is doing. So we will blame them and take money from them. When you do that, when you take more money from enterprises, you get less of what those enterprises do. So you reduce the supply. What happens to that? What happens when you do that? More inflation. So
Right.
It'll be a brilliant thing to do. But we also need to, I think we need to touch on the fact that this is another instance of how much of a fiscal and a fiscal phenomenon that inflation really is, and a regulatory phenomenon. Because his first month in office, Joe Biden added a ton of spending and a ton of regulation. So what you do is you put all that on the economy. You weigh down supply with regulation. You inflate demand with more money and actual direct transfer payments to people. But the transfer is actually from the future to the present because you're borrowing that money to do that.
Sure.
So what you're doing is you're putting a whole lot of money into the economy and suppressing what it can do. That is a fiscal and regulatory phenomenon. And it was in the 70s too, under Nixon, Ford, and Carter. It's a fiscal and regulatory phenomenon. You have to have the money supply there for it to happen. But this is caused by government policy, by the Biden administration, and by Congress. No one else, not Putin, not even the Fed. It's caused by them. So when they say we're going to rip away the windfall profits of these companies, let's look at. I'll cue you in on a little fact that is little known. Yes, it's true that ExxonMobil just reported their largest profit ever.
Mm-hmm.
No doubt about it. But the profit ratio, the profit in oil and gas companies is relatively low. It's not they don't make a lot of profit. They get a lot of money because they make something so important that everyone uses it. So they make their money in volume. So when you say they're making a huge profit, it's not a profit in terms of the percentage of input that they put in compared to the output. If you want to find an area where they make a lot of money in terms of the percentage of what they put in, oh, look at big tech. Facebook and Twitter, they make money hand over fist, and they don't put anything into it. But oil companies actually do some work and supply something exceedingly important, in fact, critical to the economy. So when you say if they're making 2%, but they're supplying they're supplying the whole economy, well, yes, they're going to bring in some money.
Yeah, I mean,
but real quick, Tony, we should also remember that in 2020 and 2021, during the height of the pandemic, the oil companies were losing tons of money because at one point the oil was negative. It dipped into the negative, meaning they had to pay people to take the oil. So like Sam said, first of all, energy companies' profit margins are actually like pretty slim, compared to technology companies, healthcare companies. So this media narrative that the big oil companies are just, somehow swimming in, $100 bills makes no sense. And also let's never forget that they produce it, but it's sold on an international market. And also when it goes to the gas station, that is not big oil directly selling it to the gas station. Gas stations are like 90% mom and pop owned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the effect of this windfall profits thing is, I think, is the most important thing to highlight. It's going to severely reduce the incentive for future oil and gas exploration, because why seek to increase the supply of a product when you can't make any money off of it? So this would end up reducing the supply of the goods that consumers want and need. And again, that's why I pointed out made sure to highlight what you were saying, Sam, about like this is constraining supply, and that's what's really driving inflation. So this, to crack down on inflation, right, in the minds of Elizabeth Warren, and to stick it to these pandemic profiteers, they're exacerbating the problem. Like it's insanity. And again, to Jim's point, and I'll let you talk on this a little bit. If their plan was to do what we're deeming the unintended consequences, what would they do differently?
Yeah. Look, windfall profits, right? Windfall profit tax. Elizabeth Warren is a socialist. All right. And so is Bernie Sanders and the rest of them. Something about the Northeast, the water up there, I suppose. I don't know. But windfall profits, right? So what is a windfall profit? Well, a windfall is $1 more than Elizabeth Warren personally thinks that your company or your industry should have made in profit that year.
Right.
And we'll let you know what it is. And actually, it's everything. You just say everything.
Oh,
right?
So it's similar to the fair, you paying your fair share. It's
That's
just
right.
Well, a little bit higher than what the current rate is.
That's right. Hey, Elizabeth Warren, if you think that corporations are collecting windfall profits, then just set the corporate tax rate higher. Don't go after what you arbitrarily think is a windfall, and I'm just going to take that money away from you profiteers. So we have to worry about big meat too, right? She was even going after
Jim, always bringing up big meat.
Always bringing up big meat. This podcast is banned again. All right, but look, the Daily Wire had a story actually. Wholefield. This is again with the inflation, and by the way. Even if Elizabeth Warren and the government was able to just hoard and bring into the government all of the windfall profits that these corporations and these industries don't deserve because they're gouging you, that would do nothing for inflation. Zero. It had nothing to do with it. It would just bring more. It would just bring more money to the central planners who want to, I guess, cut checks and give those to people and make inflation even worse. Fantastic. These people are economic morons. But like the Daily Wire had a story, wholesale food prices are up 16.2% annually. Fruits and vegetables, 18% higher than they were a year ago. It says here, fresh and dry vegetables rose by a massive 81.5%. Now, is big vegetable exploiting COVID to keep us all from eating well, eating healthy? I don't think so. Chickens up 28.6%. Fish and shellfish, 19.7% year over year. And then dairy products, of course, big milk and big cheese are up 19.3%. Now, the idea that these corporations are actually not what they have always done, and they have an incentive to do this, pass along in a reasonable way the cost of their costs to operate their business and deliver their products and all that stuff. The idea that they're like price gouging, and that is the dodge and the BS of the people responsible for this responsible for inflation. They never take responsibility for government policies increasing, having this runaway inflation. And we have not, the people in the comments here, this is just the beginning, people. It's going to get worse. It's always going to get worse. That's like one of my mottos. I should have it tattooed somewhere on my body because it's always going to get worse. This is just the beginning. The Federal Reserve, look, the Fed's been talking about interest rate hikes. I think what was it, a quarter point last month? I read a story today that we're talking probably a half point in May next month, and we could have like a 2% interest rate hike from the Fed in 1 year. We used to never have anything. A typical raise was like 3%. That's considered a cost of living increase for decades. Inflation was so low, we never talked about it. When was the last time that this nation was obsessed about inflation? 40 years ago.
Right.
We would never talk about it. In fact, all we talked about was how much farther the dollar was going because the rise of technology and efficiencies in our economy were making everything cheaper. Now everything is like doubling in expense in just a year. It's insane. And then when the Fed, so if you think this economy is bad now, wait till the Fed has to start raising interest rates again. And part of that is because of all the money artificially shoved into the economy. When they have to start raising interest rates, because that's like the number one lever that the Fed pulls to try to control runaway inflation, or even to control a little bit of inflation. This is insanely runaway inflation. So when the Fed has to start raising interest rates, then you start seeing the entire economy slow down even more. So if you think it's bad now, it's probably going to be a lot worse a year from now, I'm afraid to say, because this government, this administration is not interested in growing the economy and trying to find ways to get out of inflation without ruining everybody's life and businesses. They're not interested in doing that because they're socialists. They're obsessed with big industry and windfall profit tax. It's all a distraction. It's all a distraction from the damage, the active damage they're doing to this economy and to the pocketbooks and the lives of everybody listening to this podcast.
And they're playing with fire, because if they're going to debase the currency, they could actually lead to the fall of the dollar being the world reserve's currency. And one other thing, during the pandemic, when they shut down all the mom and pop, businesses, they actually increased the power of these monopolistic companies. So part of the reason why they can say, "Oh, big meat," is setting arbitrary prices. That's because they, their policies, their lockdowns made it so that a couple of large corporations control so many sectors of this economy.
Yeah, and also another thing to point out about the specter of them raising interest rates is, not only will it, undermine the economy as a whole, but the cost of serving the national debt will skyrocket. I saw one thing that was like even modest increases to the interest rates would result in like an additional $5 trillion to the national debt over the next few years or something. We could spend more time on that in the future because surely inflation will be a topic that we want to cover. There's one other facet of this that I am just going to speed through here because I want to save 10 minutes for our secondary topic. And that is related to a strategy of shifting the blame for inflation away from the administration is to blame the majority of the inflation on an energy costs, which they blame on Putin. So to reduce the price of energy, the Biden administration is approving more public land leases for oil and gas exploration. No, I'm just kidding. They're not doing that. They actually want to turn more corn into ethanol. So speaking from a bioprocessing and ethanol manufacturing plant in Menlo, Iowa, Biden announced that he would make gasoline blended with ethanol available year-round instead of suspending its sales during summer. Now, I didn't know this, but ethanol gasoline sales are suspended during summer months in most of the country because the exhaust from ethanol-heavy fuel contributes to air pollution when outside temps are high. You guys aware of that? I didn't know that.
I was, yep.
So, they're doing this despite the fact that a recent study found that corn-based ethanol is actually worse for the climate than gasoline. The study published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science contradicts previous research commissioned by the U.S. Department of Agriculture showing ethanol and other biofuels to be relatively green. The research, which was funded in part by the National Wildlife Federation and the U.S. Department of Energy, found that ethanol is likely at least 24% more carbon intensive than gasoline due to emissions resulting from land use, changes to grow corn along with processing and combustion. So it's just like, well, I wanted to spend in a previous episode more time specifically talking about just how terrible like all solutions to climate change are, and highlighting this study as ethanol is not a solution to fighting climate change. But the fact that the administration is turning towards this, which is like counter to their climate change narrative, is just like, I don't know. I don't know whether it's like pathetic or funny or sad or angering. I'm not really sure, but
This is another instance of the situation where the Biden administration and the Democrat Party in particular, but also the Uniparty, don't understand how prices work. That prices are a signal to people as to how to put their resources. So if prices of housing are going up as they are, that's because people really want houses. We're not building houses because local and state governments don't allow it. And so you have more people chasing fewer houses, so they are willing to spend more money. Now, here's an interesting thing, though, having to do with the ethanol mandate. If you want to burn corn, you're going to raise the price of food. If you're going to burn corn to drive your cars, you're raising the price of food even more. So if you're worried about steaks costing $25 a pound, well, that's going to double.
Yeah, 40% of corn produced in the United States goes to making ethanol. Surely that will increase. Jim, it looked like you wanted to say something, but make it quick because I want to talk about this other topic here.
Yeah, I mean, it was just mentioned. I mean, ethanol burns less efficiently in an automobile than regular gasoline. So not only are we burning corn that could, farmland basically, that could go to alleviating what is now becoming a global grain crisis, we're putting it in vehicles a fuel that burns less efficiently. So you're actually filling up your tank more often by using more ethanol in the fuel than you would have if it was regular gasoline. Plus, it pollutes more and creates more smog, and that's why you don't use it in the summer. Yeah,
and tends to damage those engines more as well. So
it does. It does.
It's just,
but it gets
from
you
any
votes.
angle, it's bad.
It gets you votes in farm states,
especially Iowa, which is super important.
If you wanted to do damage to the economy and to the global food supply, this is exactly what you would do. Exactly.
All right. We got this other last topic I want to spend the last 10 minutes of the podcast talking about. This is a report. I've got an article from the Wall Street Journal talking about a report, States of COVID Performance. The author of this article starts off saying, more than 2 years into the COVID-19 pandemic, it's time to draw some conclusions about government policy and results. The most comprehensive comparative study we've seen to date was published last week as a working paper by the National Bureau of Economic Research, and it deserves wide attention. The authors are University of Chicago economists Casey Mulligan and Stephen Moore and Phil Kerpen of the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. They compare COVID outcomes in the 50 states and the District of Columbia based on 3 variables: the economy, education, and mortality. It's a revealing study that belies much of the conventional medical and media wisdom during the pandemic, especially in the first year when severe lockdowns were described as the best and only moral policy. So the author, I'm just going to kind of breeze through some of this stuff and then open it up to conversation here. The author of the article pays a lot of attention to Florida, which is ranked 6th overall, which is the biggest state to crack the top 10. The author says, recall how the Sunshine State's decision to open itself relatively soon after the first lockdowns was derided as cruel and destructive. Governor Ron DeSantis was called Governor Death Sentence. It's kind of clever. The study ranked Florida 28th in mortality, in the middle of the pack, and about the same as California, which ranked 27th, despite its far more stringent lockdowns and school closures. But Florida ranks 3rd for the least education lost and 13th in economic performance. California, on the other hand, ranks 47th overall because its shutdowns crushed the economy, 40th place, and in-person schooling, which was in 50th place. In other words, Florida did about average on mortality as other states, but did far better in protecting its citizens from severe economic harm and its children from losing schooling. Quoting one of the authors, it says the correlation between health and economy scores is essentially 0, which suggests that states that withdrew the most from economic activity did not significantly improve health by doing so. And blue states didn't do so well in any category. The bottom 10, according to this article, the bottom 10 are dominated by states and DC that had the most stringent lockdowns and were among the last to reopen schools. Their economies are for the most part still behind others and recovering from the pandemic. New York, whose former governor Andrew Cuomo, he's former governor? What happened to that guy? He was such a cool guy. Was celebrated as a COVID hero, ranks 49th. Albany's severe and overlong economic shutdowns, 48th. Had no payoff in mortality, which ranked 47th. Just terrible. So I guess the opening question, or the opening up to the panel here, anyone who wants to chime in can. Are states going to learn from this? If the next pandemic comes around, are they going to change their tune? Are they going to not have as severe lockdowns, or are they going to just do the same thing they did this last time around? What do you think? Let's go with you, Chris.
I assume that it's going to fall along partisan lines again. I think that Republican governors are most likely going to try to remain as open as possible. Democratic blue state governors are going to try to close down as much as possible. I wrote an article about it, and another thing that I think we should note here is that Florida performed, about average. I think you said 27th in terms of mortality.
Yeah.
But keep in mind that Florida has a much higher percentage of elder citizens than most other states, because so many people go down there to retire. So
Good point.
that should be taken into the equation there. And just one other quick thing, because I want Sam and Jim to be able to jump in. We're only now beginning to see some of the other outcomes of the lockdowns, such as teen suicide rate, drug overdose rates, loss of education rates, so on and so forth. Those are going to be years in the making. I was very worried about what the long-term consequences would be during the initial lockdowns. We're only starting to see the beginning of what the destruction that was wrought by that. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I think you're very right about the partisan lines. Blue governors will do what they did, and red governors will do what they did. But this time around, hopefully this is years and years in the future, they'll be able to use studies like this to justify their not as stringent lockdowns. Whereas this first time around was kind of just like an experiment. Jim, what do you think about all this?
Well, I mean, let's remember that this actually just points up to the thing that kind of things that drive me crazy is that it's a complete corruption of our public discourse, driven by the media. Andrew Cuomo was praised by our corrupt corporate media as the model governor. He was handling COVID so much better, especially better than Trump, that idiot president we had, who didn't care if grandma died, right?
Right.
And then you do an objective study. And of course, he was covering up all of these nursing home deaths. He was sending thousands of sick elderly people from the hospitals right back to the nursing homes where they spread COVID and killed even more people. That was covered up by the state, by Cuomo himself, and then by our media.
Oh, that's why Cuomo got thrown out, because of that. That's right.
No, actually, it wasn't that.
Okay, sorry. Keep going.
Yeah, just Google it. Yeah, well, maybe not. But yeah, so here we have an objective study then, 2 years on. And every single state and governor that was held up as the ones that care so much about you and grandma and making sure we're safe and that our kids are safe. Every one of those states, every one of those governors had the worst results, and they did not care about you. They did not care about your kids and the education they got. They cared about doing whatever the teachers unions told them to do. And again, that's another thing that we learned later, is that the CDC was not setting mask policies in school or even opening or closing school recommendations based on the science. They were doing it based on whatever Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions told them to do. And they waited to write their actual last recommendations until the teachers union actually weighed in and gave it back to them. These are things that happened 2 years later, and we only know about that because we don't rely on CNN to give us the news. We actually read other places. But every single one of these blue states with these governors who are held up as heroes for saving people's lives actually ruined more lives and killed more people than Governor Death Santis in Florida. Florida was held up as a living hellhole, that if you wanted to live, you better get the hell out of Florida because that governor's going to kill you with his policies. And as it turns out, of course, that was absurd. And the truth of the matter is that what Florida was able to accomplish in other red states, frankly, was that they were able to reduce the damage psychically to the people who lived in their states, but especially the children, by making sure they go to school. There are 2 years now plus of schooling, important key schooling that these kids will never get, and they're going to be held behind their entire life because of this. All, one, to get the bad orange man out of the White House. We'll just destroy everything to get him out, and then two, just to make sure that we establish that we can control you and the economy and the entire world, in our sphere anytime we want, based on saving your life.
Right.
That's what this was about. Control, not about anything else.
Yeah, the full report and everything, all the articles talking about it, it's in the show notes. But Sam, I'm gonna give you last word on this, just from like a think tank perspective. When reports like this are put together, that politicians of the future will be able to hold as intellectual ammunition against the headwinds of the public pressure to do more, to take something on like this, like the blue states did. I think that's kind of shows just how important organizations like the one that did this study is, and organizations like the Heartland Institute. Take us home, Sam.
Thanks, Don. That's true. Organizations, we do provide that kind of information that's really useful. And in this case, it's very clear that the mandates and school closures, the lockdowns, did not improve the general public health, and they did harm across the board, socially, intellectually, for children. It was just an awful thing. But why did they happen? It was pointed out, Chris pointed out, that there was a certain partisan divide there. The reality is that this was a situation that had political desires behind it, which were, as Jim said, to remove the orange man, but also they have to do with a general trend of our society in this 21st century, which is to remove consequences of elite actions from the elite and place them on the public. That is precisely what happened in this instance, especially if you think, as should be evident to any thinking creature, I think, that the lockdowns led to Joe Biden becoming president. We wouldn't have these disasters that we've had, sort of a rolling avalanche of disasters over the last year to year and a half. We wouldn't have these if we had been in better hands politically.
Yep, for all the Easter conversations that you're sure to have that will probably revolve around COVID, make sure that you have this study in your pocket to reference to all of the people that are saying that governors like Ron DeSantis sentence people to death. But as you can hear, the music is rolling, which means it is time to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. And for those people that are listening to the audio only, probably on a Friday, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, join us a day earlier on Thursday for the live stream of this on YouTube, Rumble, Twitter, Facebook, whole bunch of different places. You can join in the conversation, noon Central Time, by the way. You could join in the conversation, leave a comment, leave a question. Maybe we'll throw your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll answer your question on the fly. If you'd like, you could follow us on Twitter at InTheTankPod. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions for the show, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Chris Talgo, what do you've got to plug?
StoppingSocialism.com and heartland.org.
Fantastic. And Sam Karnick, where could people go to find your work?
At ST Karnick on Twitter and other of those form of entertainment, and also heartlanddailynews.com.
Fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.
Happy Easter.